After Mario Kessler met his fate, Kurt Eubanks feared for his life. While Kevin intended to make an example of him as well to further establish his presence in Washington, he received a phone call from Herman Thompson. Herman urged Kevin to let Kurt Eubanks go, telling Kevin that he owed his father a favor from a long time ago. Herman told Kevin that he would consider it as him now owing Kevin a favor should Kevin agree, which he reluctantly did. However, Kevin didn't come back empty-handed that night. After all, it wouldn't affect him much if he didn't let Kurt Eubanks go. "You can leave now." Kevin put away his phone and pointed to the door as he spoke dismissively to Kurt Eubanks.
You're really letting me go?"
Kurt Eubanks asked in disbelief. "Your family is smart enough to know who to find to get you off my hands," Kevin said, not even looking at him. He just continued. "But if you feel comfortable kneeling on the ground, you can continue kneeling. You have plenty of money. It's not a big deal to stay here in this club for one night." Kurt Eubanks didn't answer. He struggled to stand up from the floor. After rubbing his aching knees, he limped away. Seeing that the matter was almost settled, Jake Morris did not choose to stay too much longer. He put the glass down on the table and was about to leave, but stopped after a few steps.
"You have made a name for yourself in this city tonight, but I'm sure that a certain relative of mine has also received the news. Your relationship with him isn't good, and he will surely make your path in Washington more difficult for you in the future. I suggest that you make a plan for your future path here, but remember to find me for a drink when you have time." After saying these words, Jake Morris left without looking back. In the study of the Murphy's family's mansion, Carson Murphy was sitting in a chair with his head deeply lowered. Donald Murphy squinted his eyes. His face was so tense that it could make people shiver just to look at him. Herman Thompson sat in a chair off to the side. After a long while, Donald Murphy coldly spat out 5 words. "Do you know your mistake?" Carson Murphy was stunned at first, then slowly shook his head. "Grandfather, I was not wrong tonight. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of Jake Morris, the one who would have been taught a lesson would have definitely been Kevin." As soon as he said that, Donald Murphy picked up the porcelain coffee cup from the table in front of him and smashed it on Carson Murphy's head. Although it hurt a lot, Carson Murphy didn't dare to make any sound. "You lost so badly and embarrassed this family so much, and you still are not willing to admit your mistake? When will you learn? You don't even want to admit your defeat. You are beyond redemption," Donald Murphy roared angrily. Carson Murphy clenched his fist tightly. No matter how unwilling he was, he did not have the courage to vent his anger to his grandfather. Herman Thompson did not have any intention of stepping in. Every family had their own problems. Donald Murphy was educating his descendants, and it had nothing to do with him. Descendants of such wealthy and powerful families did not live as glorious as outsiders often assumed they did. Instead, they often had to shoulder a lot of responsibilities to maintain their family's high social status. The children of ordinary families might be able to laugh it off when they made mistakes, but families like the Murphy family would at least be lambasted by Donald Murphy, and at worst, be faced with public ridicule and humiliation. Because men like Donald and Herman were already old, they knew that they would soon be buried in the earth. There were not many more things they could do now. Apart from using their prestige to protect the family, their biggest wish was to nurture an extraordinary next generation. There were talented people in every generation, and time would never stop. In the future, they could only hope they would be able to foster the next outstanding generation. "Have you lived a luxurious life in this city for so long that you almost can't recognize your identity?" Donald Murphy asked his grandson coldly. His expression did not improve in the slightest. "Grandfather, you really—" Carson started to say. "You still dare to refute me?"
Donald Murphy forcefully interrupted Carson's explanation. He added, "From tomorrow onward, I will punish you by not allowing you to leave this house for 2 months. When you understand what you have done, you can come and find me to admit your mistake. Only then can you leave." Carson took a deep breath, turned his head, and left the study. After calming down the anger in his heart, Donald Murphy turned his eyes to Herman Thompson. "Old friend, your eyesight hasn't weakened at all, has it? You were able to spot someone who has such a good relationship with the young heir of the Morris family. Your grandchildren will be set up to achieve a meteoric rise in this city very soon," Donald Murphy said with some envy and self-mockery. Herman slowly put down the tablet in his hands. His aged eyes lit up as he said, "What I want is Kevin's ability, not his relationship with the Morris family. You should know about the conflict between him and the Morris family." Donald opened his mouth but did not say a word. He shook his head with a bitter smile. This was also the thing that Donald Murphy couldn't figure out. A while ago, the Morris family was intent on killing Kevin. Why would Jake Morris come out personally to help him today? "Looks like I have to talk to Kevin tomorrow. There are clearly many secrets that kid has been holding close to the chest," Herman Thompson said softly as he sighed deeply. In a luxurious villa in Washington, D.C., Calvin Morris listened attentively to the reports being delivered by his subordinates. He had been surprised to learn that Kevin Williams was here in Washington, and even more surprised that his half-brother Jake had intervened in a confrontation on Kevin's behalf. "You mean Jake and Kevin are on the same side?" Calvin Morris asked. His face did not look good. He tapped his fingers on the table and carefully analyzed the situation. "Yes, sir," the man replied respectfully. "No wonder Jake Morris suddenly came after me when Kevin was suppressed. It turns out that the two of them had reached some kind of shady agreement." Calvin Morris muttered under his breath as he exhaled slowly. The two people he hated the most had suddenly come together. No one could ever be happy to hear that two mortal enemies had aligned, and Calvin Morris was no exception. "According to what I know, sir, Kevin seems to have just arrived in D.C. within the past 24 hours. He should be with the Murphy family now," the man tried to report. Only those who were close to Calvin Morris knew how strange his temper was. Although following someone with his level of prestige could bring many benefits, there were dangers always lurking in the shadows. "The Murphy family? Isn't that kid one of the ones Kevin had a conflict with tonight? What kind of trick is he playing?" Calvin frowned slightly, but he didn't get any answer. A few minutes later, Calvin let out a light snort. "Since the two of them seem to be intent on seeking death together, it at least saves me the trouble of having to break them one by one," he said. Calvin Morris felt that he was undoubtedly worthy of being the next patriarch of the Morris family. In just a few minutes, he had thought of many ways to accomplish that goal. What had first been terrible news that Kevin and Jake were working together was now something Calvin saw as working to his advantage. He was sure that Jake Morris was trying to recruit Kevin because of his talent in herbalism. He wanted to train Kevin to be his right-hand man. Given this, Calvin Morris's goal would be very clear. As long as Jake Morris's plan was in place, it would save him a lot of trouble. However, the first thing he needed to do was to smother Kevin before that plan was put into action. After leaving the nightclub, Kevin did not choose to return to the Murphy family's mansion. After all, he had certainly lost the goodwill of the Murphy family already tonight. What would happen if he went back now? He had nothing to do, so he slowly walked the busy streets of Washington, D.C., and watched the night scene under the dazzling lights of the city. He seriously thought about what Jake Morris had said when he left. If Jake wanted to help him, then Calvin would definitely want to cut him down all that much more. The streets were filled with people. Countless strangers passed by Kevin, but no one even looked at him. At that moment, Kevin suddenly remembered the words of a famous person. He was alone in the capital without a roof over his head. He had no relatives here. Although he still had a large amount of money in his bank account, of course, which was enough for ordinary people to live freely for their entire lives, perhaps it would not be enough for several generations just yet. And he also had the Williams Company and other companies behind him. He couldn't be said to be penniless by any stretch of the imagination. But so what if he had a mountain of gold and silver? He was still alone in this strange city. A strong sense of loneliness enveloped him. Kevin could no longer remember how many years it had been since he had last experienced this feeling. But at the same time, it also seemed like he had been in this state continuously ever since he was kicked out of the Williams family. To be honest, no one liked this kind of life. If it wasn't for the fact that he was currently mentally strong, he knew that if he stayed in this kind of situation for too long, it would be very easy for him to fall into a state of depression. Kevin took a deep breath in the middle of a busy sidewalk. For a long time, he had never faced the pressure that he had to bear now. It was not that he did not want to face reality, but he had also decided that he did not want to look back on the thorny road that he had once walked on. Sometimes, he also thought that if he really looked back, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to bear the heavy burden on his body and he might stop moving forward altogether. Although Washington was a city of opportunity, it didn't give him the feeling of being at home. That night, Kevin was thinking about a lot of problems, but he couldn't think clearly. He also did not know how long he had walked aimlessly on the streets. It was not until well after midnight that he noticed he was soaked from head to toe by the rain. It was only when the cold wind blew that his mind began to clear and he realized he needed to find shelter. He randomly found a hotel with an available room. A person's collapse usually happened in an instant, no matter how much pressure they face right in front of their eyes. To be able to seemingly lose one's mind in the blink of an eye. Time passed by without Kevin even noticing. Kevin only felt that he had just closed his eyes, but the sky outside was getting brighter and brighter. After quickly washing up, Kevin looked at himself in the mirror and slowly clenched his fists. He didn't understand why he insisted on living like this. He wasn't a greedy person. However, he kept reminding himself that there were many people depending on him for protection. Even if it was just for Lily, Kevin would never allow himself to fall easily on this road. He browsed through his phone. As expected, what happened last night had caused quite a stir in Washington, D.C. The matter still needed to be resolved. Kevin tidied up his clothes and straightened his mind and then hailed a cab to take him to the mansion of the Murphy family. Kevin knew he wouldn't be greeted there the same way he was the day before. After leaving the nightclub, Kevin wandered the streets of Washington, D.C. for several hours, contemplating his loneliness and isolation before finally checking himself into a hotel. When he woke up the next morning, he decided that he still needed to resolve the issue with the Murphy family, so he hailed a cab to head to the Murphy estate. When he arrived at the front door of the Murphy family's mansion, a staff member quickly came up to him and said respectfully, "Mr. Williams, please follow me. Mr. Murphy has been awaiting your arrival." "Lead the way." Kevin nodded slightly and muttered in his heart, "That old fox." However, such a situation was not unacceptable to him. He might not be too close to the Murphy family in the future, but he had not even taken the first step in Washington, D.C. Having one more friend was better than having one more enemy. Soon, Kevin came to the study of Donald Murphy. "Mr. Murphy, Mr. Thompson." Kevin greeted the two old men respectfully. Regardless of whether they would stand opposite of each other in the future, there was no reason for Kevin not to be respectful to Donald Murphy now. "Young man, I don't want you to feel any burden. You should know that people always move forward even if they think of the past. No one could change what has already happened, but the only thing that can change is how people perceive it. Do you understand what I mean?"
Donald Murphy said as he stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back. He pointed at a chair and gestured for Kevin to sit down.
"By the way, I am very curious about how you have developed a relationship with Jake Morris. Not too long ago, the Morris family hated you to the core,"
Herman Thompson added faintly. Although Donald Murphy didn't seem to have any opinions about what had happened last night, the person who was beaten up was his beloved grandson, and it was the Murphy family whose reputation now suffered as a result. How long had the Murphy family been standing atop the pyramid in Washington? Even a 3-year-old child wouldn't stand for being put in his place by an outsider like this. However, no one knew how many things Herman Thompson and Donald Murphy had talked about in the second half of the night. Most of it was about the things that were going to happen around Kevin. Kevin didn't know how to answer a question about his new friendship with Jake Morris. He couldn't possibly tell the two old men that he had played a trick on Jake, could he? Furthermore, Jake Morris was as innocent as a child. He didn't even realize what was going on even as Kevin treated him as his trusted subordinate. After thinking for a short while, Kevin could only deflect the question. However, Herman Thompson and Donald Murphy looked at each other. Obviously, they knew that Kevin was trying to avoid the question. Just how wise were they? They could tell what Kevin was thinking with just one look. Obviously, he didn't want them to know the truth of the matter. Who in this day and age would not hide some secrets from them?
"By the way, I heard that you are going to participate in the competition held by the Herbalist Society,"
Donald Murphy said, deciding not to dwell too much on this matter. Since Kevin clearly didn't want to tell him the nature of his relationship with Jake Morris, he wouldn't force him to do so. After all, he had always been a person who did not seek too much from others. "I just want to participate," Kevin said, scratching his head with a bit of shyness and embarrassment.
"Young people can get better training by experiencing such a big thing. If you need any help, feel free to ask,"
Donald Murphy said generously. "Well, if you want to talk about offering help, I do have a situation right now. I came from Chicago in a hurry, so I don't know much about how things work in Washington. That's why I didn't bring a lot of herbs that I use to refine pills with me." Kevin touched his chin and said shamelessly. However, Donald Murphy misunderstood, thinking Kevin was asking for some herbs for free from the Murphy family. "Mr. Murphy, please don't misunderstand. I'm just asking you to tell me where I can find someone who is selling herbs here in the city. Although I haven't seen anyone selling herbs since I came from Chicago, I still have plenty of money in my pocket to buy them for myself." Herman Thompson couldn't help but burst out laughing when he heard that. Donald Murphy's facial expression also turned strange.
"Although our family isn't all well-trained herbalists, we have collected quite a number of herbs over the years. Later, I will get someone to take you to look at them. If you want anything, just take it," Donald said. He felt that he could not speak to Kevin for too long. Otherwise, he might get angry and lose his temper, sending him away too soon. However, no one noticed that deep in Herman Thompson's eyes, there was an indescribable expression that flashed when his gaze stopped on Kevin. Soon, Kevin came to the backyard of the Murphy family's estate behind the two men. The herbs Donald referred to were stored in a greenhouse there. After casually looking at the layout of the shelves, a smile appeared on Kevin's face. Although this was his first time here, he could tell the layout of the place with just a glance. The arrangement of these herbs had been made by a master. There were also many traces of recent activity. It was obvious that someone often came here to collect and organize herbs. Donald had also lied to him when he said that no one in the Murphy family was a well-trained herbalist. If that was really the case, then where did this greenhouse come from? He quickly walked around the place where the highest quality medicinal ingredients were stored. There were not many top medicinal ingredients, but there were also no low-quality ones either. Most of them were above average. Although the quality was not the best, it was already considered noteworthy to have collected so many herbs in such a short period of time. 5 days passed in a flash. During this period of time, Kevin stayed indoors and did not take a single step outside. He stayed in the greenhouse almost constantly and focused on studying and experimenting with the medicinal ingredients. Meanwhile, in the study, Carson Murphy stood in front of his grandfather. Donald Murphy did not even lift his head to look from the book in his hand. "Grandfather, I was wrong." Carson was the first to break the silence in the study. He had been thinking hard over the past few days. He kept thinking about what he had done. Although he still did not genuinely think he had done anything wrong, it was unbearable for him to be locked up in his room any longer. He decided that he would ask for his grandfather's forgiveness first and regain his freedom. Then he would slowly think of a way to get back everything he had lost from Kevin. "What did you do wrong?" Donald's finger, which was flipping through the book, hesitated for a moment. He slowly opened his mouth as he asked the question. "I shouldn't have been too ambitious. As a member of the Murphy family, I should have considered how my actions would impact the family name. I shouldn't have used my power to bully others, which caused me to ultimately humiliate myself and everyone around me." Carson buried his head deep in his chest and said sincerely. Just by looking at his general appearance, it would seem that Carson was sincerely admitting his mistake. However, if someone could see his pained face and the intense hatred in his eyes, they wouldn't think that way. Donald took a deep breath and showed a touch of relief on his face. "It's good to hear that you think that way. I'm an old man. In the not-too-distant future, the entire family will be in your hands. You must work hard to temper your disposition and keep your focus on the bigger picture." Donald Murphy continued to try and educate him earnestly. "Although things are peaceful right now, there are many talented people around your age who have their eyes set on toppling the Murphy family. If you don't pay attention and stop studying, you will be left far behind by others. Don't blame me for being too cruel to you. It's just that the situation is pressing. It was not easy for this family to reach the heights of wealth and power that it has. I really can't bear to see it decline one day." "I know, Grandpa. I understand completely." Carson still lowered his head and didn't say another word. It was as if he was afraid that Donald Murphy would see through his heart and find the truth in his eyes should he raise his head. "Since you know that you were wrong and have admitted your mistake, you don't need to stay grounded at home. All right, let me tell you something. Kevin will be participating in the herbalist competition held by the Herbalist Society. During this time, we must ensure his safety. You have to take the lead on that." He stood up and then added, "Kevin is definitely not an ordinary person. Right now, he's like a sleeping giant. I dare to say that there are only a handful of people his age who can compete with him. Furthermore, the relationship that Kevin has with the Thompson family has far exceeded our own. If we don't do something soon..." He stopped for a moment before continuing. "If we don't let Kevin see our sincerity, our family might miss a golden opportunity with that young man." "I understand. I will definitely take good care of Kevin." Carson Murphy kept his hands tightly behind his back. To him, this was a great opportunity indeed. On the battlefield far away from the world of ordinary people, the upper echelons of the Myriads were gathered in a massive tent. It had been some time since they had arrived there. During this period of time, they had fought several tough battles with the Alliance, but the results did not make them feel optimistic. "Why haven't we found the deputy chief after such a long time?" Brett Stewart, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a pained expression on his face. One could easily tell how much pressure the Myriads were feeling right now. The battle between the Myriads and the Alliance had spread far and wide, and even into the world of ordinary people. The great powers were intent on not interfering in the battle between the Myriads and the Alliance. They even hoped that the two organizations would fight to the death, and in the end, both sides would suffer heavy losses. At that time, they would no longer care about their own status, and they would launch a swift and decisive attack to completely eradicate the two organizations. They would give the world a clean slate. However, although some people had received the news, they could not intervene. To them, the Alliance and the Myriads were both evil organizations currently caught in a struggle that was threatening to spill out into the ordinary world with possibly deadly results. Brett Stewart was sitting at the head of the table inside a tent of the Myriads base camp. He was clearly frustrated with the way the battle against the Alliance was going. Originally, the strength of the Myriads and the Alliance were almost equal, especially considering the fact that Travis Adams' power base was about the same as the Alliance leaders. When Travis Adams was attacked, he was afraid that his illegitimate daughter would be exposed. He was also worried that if he made too much noise, it would definitely cause panic among ordinary people. That was why he tried his best to suppress his spiritual energy when he attacked. In addition, the people who attacked Travis Adams at that time used some dirty tricks, which was why the tragedy happened in the first place. Now, Travis Adams was dead, and although Brett Stewart was smart and resourceful, his power base had not yet reached the point that Travis was at. Adding the Alliance's secret support from the Pinnacle, the gap between the two organizations had grown even larger. However, the Myriads had only been suppressed by the Alliance on the surface during the battle.
Sir, there's still no news from Mr. Knott, so we don't know the exact situation.
One of the higher-ups of the Myriads replied to Brett Stewart's question. Once these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the tent fell in a straight line. Everyone had a feeling of deep unease in their hearts. Although none of the people present weren't powerful in their own right, this didn't mean that they weren't afraid. This was the mentality that humans are born with. No one could overcome or avoid the fear bursting out from deep in their hearts. Those who were able to stand here before Brett Stewart were all the true higher-ups of the Myriads. They knew very well that if they lost this battle, the final outcome for all of them would be truly miserable. The tent was silent for a long time. Then an old man suddenly stood up. He said respectfully,
"Sir, I think we should try to cooperate with the Herbalist Society. Or rather, we should gather some people from the various branches of the Herbalist Society and bring them over to work for us. If we were to place our hopes on Kevin alone, wouldn't that be too risky? If Roger Knott can't bring him back in time, where would that leave us?"
These words undoubtedly aroused the hearts of many of the people present. Immediately, many of them nodded their heads in agreement. In fact, this couldn't be blamed on them. Most of the people in the Myriads didn't have any kind of friendly relationship with Kevin. The only time they had even seen him was when he had supported Brett Stewart to become the next Supreme Commander and succeeding Travis Adams. Therefore, they had no interest in placing all of their hopes for survival on a virtual stranger. So what if this person was truly capable of turning the tide of the battle in their favor? They also weren't naive. They had the ability to think on their own, and they knew that they needed to have a backup plan too. Brett Stewart tapped his index finger lightly on the table with a thoughtful look in his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't believe that Kevin would rush to the battlefield after learning about their situation. It was just that the situation was constantly changing, and he didn't have enough time to waste waiting for Kevin to be reached.
This suggestion isn't bad, but right now the Herbalist Society is currently holding an herbalist competition that happens only once every few years. Any herbalist with any bit of talent will be there participating. I'm sure the entire Herbalist Society will be fully engaged in such an important matter. If we act rashly to try to disrupt it, won't that put us at risk of becoming enemies again?
Brett Stewart supported his chin with one hand and sat back casually in the ornate chair as he analyzed the situation. His words instantly shut everyone's mouths. What he said was the truth. No one could think of a suitable reason to refute him. This caused everyone to fall into silence once again. Meanwhile, in the window of a coffee house on the 3rd floor in Washington, D.C., Jake Morris sat cross-legged on a sofa. The cigar between his fingers was letting off a greenish-gray smoke. From this vantage point, he could see the scenery of the park a block away in the distance. Suddenly, a person quickly walked in and sat opposite Jake Morris without asking for permission. He put his coffee cup down on the table in front of Jake. From the outside, the two of them looked at least fairly similar. However, their expressions were completely different. The smile on the man's gentle and refined face gave people the feeling that he was like a rising star. However, Jake Morris had an arrogant and condescending look on his face at most times.
"Didn't anyone tell you that you just can't sit anywhere here?"
Jake Morris glanced at him and said,
"Such courtesy is reserved for people, not for idiots who are hot-headed. You happen to belong to the latter group,"
the man replied. He did not care about what Jake Morris had said at all. Of course, who else could speak to Jake Morris in such a way other than Calvin Morris? Of course, this particular coffee shop was the property of the Morris family. If anyone did something out of line here, they could both hold them accountable.
"I don't have time for losers. This place belongs to my jurisdiction. You are not welcome here. Now get out of here and stop wasting my time,"
Jake Morris replied. Fury was rising between his brows. Although there was still a long time to go before the end of the competition between the two that would determine who would rise and who would fall, Jake Morris had never thought that he would lose. He had always been confident that, at the end of the day, he would see Calvin Morris as the loser. His words did not make Calvin Morris angry. He simply sat back and put his arm up on the sofa, took a sip of his coffee, and casually put down the cup again. The smile on Calvin's face was frozen.
"You took advantage of the moment when I was unprepared to take Kevin under your command, and even asked him to come to Washington to help you. It seems like I may have underestimated you after all,"
Calvin Morris said bluntly. In his impression, Kevin was a man who would rather die than live a life of dishonor. He couldn't understand why he was suddenly able to get along with someone like Jake Morris.
You don't allow others to do this even though you don't have the ability? Are you starting to get jealous?"
Jake Morris replied as he raised his eyebrows. The way he looked at him made Calvin Morris particularly unhappy. He took a deep breath and suppressed the urge to start yelling. Calvin straightened his clothes and stood up. He looked down at Jake and said,
"Don't think that you can defeat me just because you found your little right-hand man. You still have a lot of things to learn. Do you know that in my eyes you have always just been a pathetic little dog? But since you've decided that you would like to start fighting with the wolves, you should be mentally prepared. I won't hesitate to put you and your new friend down."
After saying these words, Calvin laughed loudly and walked out of the room in a hurry, not bothering to look at anyone else. Jake Morris's face quickly turned sour. He clenched his fist tightly and suddenly swept everything on the table in front of him onto the ground. His chest heaved up and down violently. It was enough to prove to anyone present the depth of the anger raging in his heart. After living inside the greenhouse day and night for days, Kevin was still not used to the strong sunlight when he walked outside. He narrowed his eyes and saw Carson Murphy standing alone in the yard. Kevin could not help but sigh. He had a headache and felt that Carson Murphy was watching him every moment. Was there really a need to hover over him right outside the door at all times like this? Just as he was thinking about this, Carson walked up to him. Before Kevin could say anything, Carson had already opened his mouth. "Hello, Mr. Williams. I just want to clear the air and say that it was my fault for offending you. Please forgive me. I don't expect you to lower yourself to the level of someone like me." Kevin was stunned when he heard that. Was this still the same Carson Murphy he knew? Why did he feel like he had changed completely after not seeing him for only a few days? Seeing that Kevin did not respond, Carson Murphy gritted his teeth and added, "I hope that you can forgive me, Mr. Williams." All he wanted to do was end this conversation. Kevin held onto his shoulder and stared at Carson for a few seconds. He said indifferently, "You're being too serious. As the saying goes, one doesn't get to know another without fighting against him. I also have to admit that I did something wrong that night. Therefore, I have to apologize as well."
"You're too kind, Mr. Williams. Why don't you and I just take a step back and start over? It would be like turning the page. What do you think?"
Carson replied faintly, "Sure, that sounds good," Kevin said as he looked at him meaningfully. To be honest, he remembered everything that had happened that night very clearly. Kevin would never believe that Carson Murphy, who was so proud, would so easily admit his mistake on his own. However, as the saying goes, when you hit someone, you do not hit their face. When you scold someone, you do not expose their shortcomings. Carson Murphy had shown such sincerity. If he still treated others with suspicion, it would appear that he did not know the big picture.
"By the way, my grandfather told me a few days ago that you would be participating in the competition held by the Herbalist Society. As you prepare, if you need anything at all, feel free to let me know. I will definitely take care of anything you need,"
Carson said as his face revealed a smile that was not quite a smile. If one observed very carefully, one would be able to recognize the coldness hidden deep in his eyes. "I'll be sure to let you know if anything comes up," Kevin said as he stared at Carson and looked at him carefully from head to toe. Although he seemed to really forgive Carson on the surface, deep in his heart there was a strong sense of danger present here. He knew that he would need to be cautious and keep his eyes wide open. Soon, the competition held by the Herbalist Society arrived as scheduled. This made the already bustling streets of Washington, D.C. even livelier. It was not an exaggeration to say that the city was busier than it had been in years. The Herbalist Society usually occupied a lofty position that other organizations did not have. Or rather, they had surpassed the scale and scope of ordinary organizations and became a being on a level all its own. No one knew how many people had benefited from their presence. It was because the organization was so unique and because refining pills was such a dangerous thing that the herbalists were held in awe. Everyone was well aware that if one was not careful, there could be an explosion in a cauldron, and ordinary people would get hurt. As a result, everyone granted the Herbalist Society the utmost respect for the careful work they performed. It was because of this unique position of privilege that the Herbalist Society occupied a collection of several beautiful buildings just outside of Washington, D.C., which ordinary people called Herbalist City. It was there, during the upcoming contest, that Kevin would surely make a name for himself. As the competition arrived, the streets of Washington, D.C. were bustling in a way that they very rarely were. The lofty position that the Herbalist Society held in the hearts and minds of ordinary people was abundantly clear on the eve of the competition. A collection of beautiful buildings and a giant arena had been built just outside of the city, which had been dubbed Herbalist City. After many weeks and months of careful preparation, the magnificent Herbalist City was brimming with a festive atmosphere. A giant screen had been erected outside of the arena, so even more people could watch the competition than were able to fit into the stands. There were hundreds of thousands of people who had come to watch the show. It could be said that it was something akin to a moment of celebration. In order to prevent anything unpleasant from happening, the Herbalist Society sent out a large number of people to maintain order in the streets surrounding the competition.
"I'm also looking forward to your performance. You are the future hope of the Herbalist Society. Don't leave with any regrets," someone was saying.
"Now everyone is watching. The competition begins," another person said. In an instant, a sound that can only be described as the air being torn in all directions could be heard. Some of the people who did not know what was going on looked around in a sense of confusion bordering on panic. They turned their heads and looked around in every direction. Out of everyone present, there was only a small number of people who were like Kevin. After quickly scanning their surroundings, they all immediately raised their heads and looked up at the sky. Countless spots of light were approaching them from overhead. After a few seconds, they finally saw what those light spots were. "Oh my God, it's a pill furnace! Countless pill furnaces are falling from the sky!" someone shouted. "Watch out! If they hit you, there will be nothing left of you but a pile of broken bones," someone else said. "Hurry up and find a place to hide," the first person said. The people in the audience had opinions of their own. Some of them even stood up from their seats in panic and wanted to run out. How heavy was a pill furnace anyway? Everyone knew it was at least several hundred pounds. A series of deep sounds rang out as they fell to the ground. The pill furnaces brought with them a series of massive impacts as they smashed into the ground, creating deep craters one after another. The dust that was stirred up caused the audience to be unable to clearly see what was even happening inside the arena.
They just fell down from the sky?"
Someone asked in bewilderment. "Why would the Herbalist Society do this? With so many pill furnaces falling from the sky, isn't there a danger of them hitting people and killing them? Why would the Herbalist Society be so daring?" Someone else wondered aloud. "I can't see the situation clearly through all the dust. Is it possible that the competition has ended before it even began?" Someone else said. Numerous discussions could be heard without end. Everyone stared at the dust-covered arena in front of them. After a long time, the dust slowly settled and dispersed. At that moment, everyone in the audience could clearly see the situation on the field. Although the deep pit created by the furnaces looked terrifying, fortunately there were no casualties. All of the pill furnaces had landed perfectly right in front of each of the participating herbalists. At that point, those herbalists who had fled from their places in a panic wanted to return to the field. However, before they could enter the field, they were intercepted by officials associated with the competition.
"Those who fled will be disqualified from the competition,"
the commissioner coldly announced from his position high up in the audience. "But that's not fair," someone immediately objected.
"In the face of something that we were all afraid of, everyone's first reaction is to run away. It's normal for anyone to do this. Please, give us another chance," someone else said.
The people outside the venue watching on a giant screen immediately became excited.
"How dare you!"
the commissioner said as he suddenly waved his hand, and a powerful pressure was emitted from his body. The expressions on the faces of hundreds of thousands of people changed when they recognized the full extent of his power. Kevin frowned slightly when he got a sense of this majestic force.
"As an herbalist, no matter what, pills must be placed first. Explosions of cauldrons are a constant threat during the process of refining pills. If someone is not able to ignore the threat of life and death under such circumstances, then they can also not focus adequately on refining the pill. Under such circumstances, when you scatter like rats, what right do you think you have to be a member of the Herbalist Society? What right do you have to even participate in a competition like this if you cannot maintain your focus on the task at hand?"
The commissioner roared as he reprimanded the people beneath him. The herbalists who had fled to safety outside the arena were filled with righteous indignation from the beginning, but their reaction quickly turned to shame as they lowered their heads. After a few moments, the chatter died down, and the person in charge of the venue received the signal from the commissioner's cold gaze. He picked up the microphone and formally began the proceedings as he said, "Now, the rest of you, listen carefully. The herbs placed in each furnace are the same in terms of age and medicinal properties. The specific refining method to be used is also recorded on the slip of paper that you will find in each of your pill furnaces. However, you must remember that everyone only has 3 chances at success. If you fail, someone will bring you the herbs again. Also, everyone must pay close attention to the time that has been allotted. You may start refining the pills now." As soon as these words were spoken, most of the competitors present quickly and impatiently rushed to open their respective pill furnaces as quickly as possible. They took out the medicinal formulas and ingredients inside and quickly began the process of refining the pills. But Kevin didn't hurry to make a move. Instead, he just stood there. He looked around and found that there were a few people who did exactly the same thing as him. They didn't even choose to light a fire, let alone start reading the instructions or begin refining the pill. When he opened the pill furnace, Kevin twitched his nose a few times and a surprised expression appeared on his face. As time passed by, scenes of furnaces exploding appeared one after another all around him. At first, there were only one or two people whose furnaces exploded, but later on, when everyone got to the same point where they had been, there would inevitably be another explosion. If one or two explosions at a level of a competition like this were considered normal and 5 or 6 were considered accidents, then how could someone explain that the same thing was happening to every single participant at the same moment in the refining process? On the high platform overlooking everything, the commissioner sat calmly in his seat and kept scanning the scene below him.
Sir, isn't it wrong for us to do this? Are you sure this is a good idea?
An old man seated next to him asked respectfully.
What's wrong? As an herbalist, if they couldn't even tell the age and degree of the medicinal properties of the ingredients they were working with, then they wouldn't be able to get very far on this road in the first place,
he replied seriously.
Yes, you're right, of course. Young people nowadays are all ambitious. What they want are all the biggest things, and they even neglect the most basic lessons. It is indeed wise to teach them a good lesson here at the onset.
Another old man nearby slowly muttered. The first man did not refute the other's words. His gaze searched the crowd for a long time before finally landing on a young man.
Commissioner, take a look right over there. That young man is Kevin Williams,
he said, pointing in Kevin's direction.
Oh, is that right?
The corner of the commissioner's mouth curled up into a faint smile. He was playing with a small green ring in his hand.
That's the kid? I don't see anything special about him,
the other old man said with a slight frown on his face.
I thought he was supposed to be an extraordinary young man, but he doesn't look like anything special to me.
The commissioner didn't pay any attention to what he had just said. He just stared hard at Kevin while evaluating this young man about whom he had heard so much. The competition for the herbalist began, and Kevin oddly was among a few who did not rush to begin making potions in his pill furnace. His decision was a wise one. As almost every other pill furnace around him exploded, it became clear that the overseers of the competition had laid a trap to prove to young herbalists to expect the unexpected. Kevin's smart take on the competition was noted by a commissioner who assessed this young man warily. However, Kevin didn't seem to care much about what was going on around him. He didn't know that there were so many people discussing him behind his back. Kevin only knew that there was something strange going on. If he had begun refining his pill right away like most of those around him, the furnace surely would have exploded by now. It wasn't a big deal for him to get hurt or suffer a little bit of embarrassment, but there was clearly something more going on here. That shouldn't be the case, Kevin muttered as he crossed his arms in front of his chest and supported his chin with one hand. He frowned as he looked at the furnace in front of him. The black dregs of the furnace had not yet been removed. It gave off an unpleasant smell. There's no problem with the pill formula, and there aren't any cracks in the pill furnace either, he said. The same words were coming out of the mouths of many of the other people present. Still, some people who refused to believe it once again mustered their courage to begin refining the pill again. Unsurprisingly, another series of explosions rang out all around Kevin. However, at that moment, the fragrance of a newly refined pill drifted over from not too far away. Under everyone's astonished gazes, a young man raised his head high and calmly took out a pill from the furnace in front of him. Few things in this world were truly unfathomable, but today, under the gazes of hundreds of thousands of people, Kevin witnessed such a thing with his own eyes. How is this possible? Kevin muttered to himself as his brows tightened. Looking at the pill that the man took out from the pill furnace, he couldn't help but hold his breath. He was not the only one who felt that it was unbelievable. Herbalists usually had superior arrogance, but even everyone around him looked on in disbelief. Those who were able to participate in this competition could at least be considered the cream of the crop among the young generation of herbalists. They would not be willing to admit defeat until the very last moment.
"Wow, this can't be real," one of them said aloud.
"Are his medicinal herbs different from ours? I tried twice, but nothing happened except for an explosion. How did he succeed in just one try? I hope someone can give us an explanation," another said.
"If you want to live, then shut up. Do you know who that person is? He's a relative of Lawrence Zimmerman," someone else whispered.
Kevin listened to the discussions of the people around him and took a few deep breaths to calm his emotions.
"Put down your pill furnaces and go back home to the farm," the young man said with disdain as he glanced at the surrounding people.
He took the pill and slowly walked over to the judges' seats. Many proud and arrogant young herbalists could only swallow their anger but not dare to say anything. First, they were afraid of this young man's identity, and more important, they really couldn't deny that they had clearly failed. They did not even have any right to say that the young man had been given an unfair advantage, so they had nothing to say about any of this turn of events. However, Kevin wasn't as hot-tempered as many of the others. He had been ridiculed by others for many years. This had the advantage of bestowing on him his calm and composed disposition. There were very few things that could cause ripples in his heart.
"Who is that person?"
the commissioner said with some appreciation as he looked down at the person who was about to walk to the seats of the judges.
"That is Mason Zimmerman, sir,"
the old man next to him replied with a smile.
"The grandson of Lawrence Zimmerman? No wonder he has so much ability,"
the commissioner said as he suddenly felt that his result now made sense. In the blink of an eye, his gaze fell upon Kevin. He really wanted to see what kind of ability the young man had. He saw that Kevin didn't make any movement at this moment. Instead, he was just staring at the position that Mason Zimmerman had occupied. The pill furnace did not seem to be emitting a high temperature. Mason Zimmerman's herbs were no different from the others' herbs, but there was one difference. He had only refined one pill, but a portion of the herbs were still left. Could it be that he is... A thought suddenly flashed through Kevin's mind, and he instantly thought it through. Kevin quickly cleared up the dregs in the furnace and put the remaining 2 sets of herbs into the furnace. His actions also attracted the attention of many people around him. After a brief moment of shock, many people actually began to laugh out loud.
"My God, what does this idiot want? What is he doing?" someone said.
"How is such a person qualified to participate in this competition in the first place? I knew he would fail, but I didn't expect to see such a good show,"
another said. In the stands, Carson Murphy covered his face with his hands, wishing that he could plaster the words, "I don't know Kevin Williams" on his forehead. The contempt in his heart towards Kevin almost had reached its peak. What the hell was this? He was embarrassing himself in front of hundreds of thousands of people. However, Kevin didn't care about any of those watching him and hoped he wouldn't fail. He carefully controlled the size of the flame. The pill furnace gradually turned red.
"I bet that this kid will blow up the furnace in less than 3 minutes," someone said.
"I don't think it will take 3 minutes. It might explode sooner than that. What's his problem anyway? I can't tell what's wrong with this kid," someone else replied. The onlookers had all kinds of reasons to think that Kevin didn't know what in the world he was doing. But as the saying goes, outsiders watched the show while experts put on the show. Some people who were paying close attention had already seen through Kevin's clues.
"What is he doing?"
Mason Zimmerman, who was standing at the judges' table, looked very serious. He thought that he was the only one who could stand out in today's competition. He did not expect that there would be someone who would try to pull him down at this point. On the high platform, the commissioner let out a soft snort.
"This kid is extraordinary. It's rare for anyone to be able to remain so calm in this kind of situation,"
the old man next to him said with praise.
He's only refining it from the halfway point. What's there to be surprised about?"
the other old man said in a tone that was the exact opposite of the first man. The commissioner was used to their combative relationship. He didn't say anything to insert himself into their conversation. He just looked at Kevin, who was still completely focused on the task at hand. Time passed. Some of the contestants had already used up all 3 chances. They were deemed to have failed and left the center of the arena. The other participants were still standing where they were, thinking hard. However, they still didn't dare to proceed to the next step out of fear that there would be another explosion. The last group of people was very straightforward. They threw the remaining medicinal herbs and pill furnaces aside without even looking at them. Some of them, who were even more perplexed, began to sit on the ground. The people in charge of the Herbalist Society didn't pay any attention to them. They allowed these people to do whatever they wanted. Anyway, the competition wasn't over yet, so they had no choice but to let them to do whatever they wanted. The allotted time for the competition was running out quickly. Kevin was seriously controlling the flames in the furnace in front of him. Nothing had happened until now, but he was sure that he had done everything right so far. Suddenly, for some unknown reason, a crack appeared in the middle of the furnace. The high temperature inside the furnace seemed to need a vent as steam was quickly released outside. The entire furnace began to tremble violently. None of the people present were the slightest bit surprised. The fact that such a situation had occurred proved one thing: the explosion of the furnace was already an inevitable outcome.
"What the hell are you still standing there in a daze for? Hurry up and run!" someone shouted.
"Oh my God, it's really going to explode,"
another said. A large group of people scattered like birds as they ran for their lives. Some people even pushed past the people in front of them, not caring if they fell or stepped on them. In the face of danger, the dark side of humanity was always exposed. The culprit in everyone's eyes, of course, was Kevin. He had placed double the amount of herbs into the furnace, and as a result, it burned at an exponentially faster rate and higher temperature than the others. The temperature in the cauldron had reached a terrifying level. At that moment, a layer of pale blue light rose from all directions where Kevin was standing and wrapped around both the man and the furnace. On the high platform, 2 old men sitting on either side of the commissioner shot out from their chairs at the same time.
"How could this be? That kid clearly didn't do anything wrong,"
the old man who had been supportive of Kevin said with his eyes wide open, his voice rising several times louder than before.
"That Zimmerman kid had obviously succeeded. Although he did it in a rough manner, he still managed to do it."
A complicated look appeared in the other old man's eyes as he quickly thought of all kinds of problems.
"Could it be that the pill's furnace resistance was greatly reduced after refining a pill once, and that's why the furnace wall broke?"
he added. The commissioner sat in his chair with his eyes slightly narrowed. His fingers that had been playing with the small green ring on his finger all this time gradually stopped. However, no one noticed that a piece of the ring had appeared in the center of his right hand, which he had placed on his thigh all this time. How could this be? It shouldn't be, Kevin said to himself, his face covered with sweat and the spiritual energy in his body gushing out quickly. He tried his best to protect himself. As for the pills in the furnace, he couldn't even think about them. After Mason Zimmerman successfully refined the pill, Kevin walked over to the furnace where he had been working and began inspecting it, realizing that a significant amount of the ingredients were still left over. While being mocked, Kevin put twice as many ingredients as the instructions called for into Mason's furnace. As the temperature rose, a crack appeared in the middle of the furnace, and it became clear an explosion was near. As people ran for cover, Kevin desperately tried to use his spiritual energy to calm the flames. The furnace trembled more and more violently. Under the effects of the incredibly high temperature, a large amount of white fog began to seep from the furnace.
"This kid is dead for sure. It looks like this explosion will definitely take his life if he doesn't get out of there soon," an onlooker said.
"He's clearly in way over his head. He should have just observed Mason Zimmerman and stayed off to the side," someone else said. Those who were watching the show didn't feel that the matter was too serious. Each and every one of them was eager to see how this would all play out, indifferent about whether it meant that Kevin would die or not. Among all of these people, the one who was the most excited was Carson Murphy. His eyes were tightly locked on Kevin. The smile on his face was so big that he couldn't contain it even if he tried. He kept roaring in his heart, "Go to hell! This is the end for you!" Kevin, who knew nothing about all this, gritted his teeth. On the one hand, he tried his best to maintain the balance inside the furnace. If his hand trembled even slightly at this point, the pill furnace would surely explode. At the same time, he quickly recalled the things he had read in the secret books. Although it was not the best time to be ruining his reputation, it was still much better than losing his life. The high temperature had already caused the blue protective cover to emit a thick white fog. This was the effect of the liquids inside evaporating into the air. Mason Zimmerman, who was casually watching from the side, revealed a pleased smile. But sometimes, God loves to joke with people. When the white fog reached a certain level, no one except for some people who were still fairly nearby could see what was going on clearly. All of a sudden, almost everyone heard Kevin screaming. Carson Murphy almost laughed out loud. It was as if he could already see the scene of the furnace exploding and Kevin being blown to pieces. But after a long moment, he still didn't hear the loud sound of the explosion that he had imagined. On the contrary, a fragrance wafted over the crowd. Some of them were still unable to react, but some of them immediately realized the scent of a miracle. "Wow, this kid must be cheating, right?" someone said in disbelief. "The pill furnace didn't explode? And he even managed to refine the pill? How is that even possible? This must be a joke, right? Am I dreaming?" someone else said. Looking at Kevin, who was still standing in the same spot after the smoke dissipated, no one knew how to describe what they were seeing. Kevin gasped for breath. The lid of the furnace had already been opened. A faint light was continuously emitted from inside the furnace. "It's all right," Kevin said softly. Sweat dripped down from his face. It was as if Kevin had just been fished out of a deep, deep ocean. Slowly, he took out a brown medicinal pill from inside the furnace. In the eyes of those who had mocked him previously, it was dazzling. It was as if they had been slapped in the face with the small pill in his hand. Mason Zimmerman's face was frozen. He clenched his fist tightly. "How did he do it?" the old man next to the commissioner said as he stroked his long beard. For a moment, he couldn't think of any way to explain the situation that had just unfolded in front of him. "What happened in the white fog?" the other man said as his eyes narrowed into a line. The commissioner was the only one who understood the situation. With his profound power base, he could clearly see what had happened in the white fog. "Since he succeeded, let's learn from him and see if we can follow in his footsteps," someone said while watching Kevin, who was walking towards the judges' seats. As the saying goes, a stone can stir up 1,000 waves. Immediately, many people ran back to their original positions and gathered the rest of the herbs together and stuffed them into their own furnaces. Perhaps this was the true nature of humans. It could also be said that this was the main reason why humans could develop to this day. As long as they saw some hope, it would stimulate endless motivation and imitation. However, not everyone had such good luck. For example, several of the competitors had already used up all of their herbs. As such, intense arguments broke out about who could use the remaining supply. Competitors snatching herbs from others could be seen everywhere. All kinds of threats were hurled out left and right. The competition was too important. No one wanted to give up until the last moment. After all, this was the best place to prove their skills. Once they succeeded, wealth and power would inevitably follow. After handing the pill to the judges, someone came over and led Kevin to a seat beside Mason Zimmerman. "I'm curious how you did it." Mason Zimmerman looked over and asked coldly. He subconsciously thought that no one among the other contestants could see the flaw of the situation. If he had not been influenced by his own childhood, he would not have noticed the problem with the herbs either. "Oh, by the way, thank you," Kevin raised his head and said as he looked at Mason. To be honest, he had some admiration and respect for this young man. Among the thousands of participants, he had been the first one to succeed. Kevin said these words without any modesty whatsoever.
"Thank me? What did I do?"
Mason frowned and asked in a deep voice. "If you had hidden the last set of herbs or destroyed them, I really wouldn't have been able to find the problem," Kevin explained. His words made Mason's face darken even more. At that time, after refining the pill, he only wanted to bring it over to the judges as quickly as possible so he could be sure to get first place in the competition. He had never even considered the possibility that he had made a mistake at that point. Very quickly, Kevin recognized a pattern in the remaining ingredients. After obtaining sufficient medicinal ingredients of their own, all of the others quickly refined the pill according to the pill formula. However, the situation that Kevin had experienced with the dense white fog did not occur.
Why is he the only one who experienced problems? Could it be that his pill refining ability is really that bad?
The old man wondered, still just as confused as before, not knowing how to explain the situation.
It's not a problem,
the other old man said, seemingly having realized something important.
To be able to refine a pill even after the pill furnace is broken, such a person would definitely not make a mistake with the temperatures of the furnace. But the truth is right in front of us, so how can we explain it?
The other old man said. It was rare for the two of them to argue like this. The other man just looked at him and smiled, then turned back to look at the commissioner. Looking at the herbalists who were cheering after their success, Carson Murphy's face was full of unwillingness.
Just a little bit more. Really, just a little bit more and it would have exploded. How did that kid do it? He muttered under his breath.
At that moment, someone suddenly walked up behind his back and patted him on the shoulder.
"Who the hell are you? I don't have time to deal with you, so why don't you get lost?" Carson said impatiently. "Come with me. I will help you fulfill your wish."
The man lowered his head and said coldly. Carson looked at him seriously.
"What do you mean?" he asked. "Come with me if you dare."
The man obviously didn't want to waste any more time talking to him. He turned around and walked away. Carson hesitated for a few seconds. Finally, he made up his mind and chose to follow quickly behind the man. Soon, the judges came to a conclusion after a brief discussion. After Mason and Kevin had succeeded one after another, more than 300 other participants also succeeded. Hundreds of medicinal pills were placed into the wooden box by the participants one after another. Then they were pushed away by the judges. Clearly, they would not return the pills to the participants. A few lines quickly surfaced on Kevin's forehead when he saw the scene. He felt that the Herbalist Society really knew how to take advantage of others when doing things. They used the excuse of holding a competition to let thousands of herbalists refine medicinal pills for them for free. All the herbs that were taken out were about to be scrapped. Moreover, the participants would not say anything about any of it. Half an hour later, all the contestants were gathered together under the instructions of the host. The people in the judges' seats discussed something with each other in low voices. Some of them had solemn expressions, while others nodded their heads a few times in succession.
"Ladies and gentlemen, herbalists, the first round of the competition has ended here. Now the honorable judges have come to a conclusion."
The host held a white card in his hand and said loudly with a smile,
"The winner of this preliminary round is Kevin Williams."
Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Mason Zimmerman stood up and held out his arms in disbelief.
"That's impossible. How could the winner be Kevin?" someone said.
"Could it be the judges made a mistake? It has to be Mason Zimmerman, right?"
someone else said. After a brief moment of astonishment, everyone became unusually excited. As the saying goes, it's not hard to offend a crowd.
"Everyone, please calm down. The outcome of the match is decided by 13 judges. It is not necessarily given to the first person to finish refining the pill,"
the host tried to explain. He didn't know how to comfort these people. Although this man was chosen as the host by the Herbalist Society, he was just an ordinary person. He didn't have the confidence to fight these herbalists head-on. Suddenly, a figure shot up from the high platform. The old man next to the commissioner stood with one hand behind his back, looking at the crowd with a cold expression on his face.
"Are you trying to argue the results decided by the judges?"
the old man said, his lips moving only slightly. The pressure emitted by this one person shocked everyone. Level 7? Kevin muttered under his breath as he raised his head and looked at the figure standing above him in disbelief. After Kevin successfully refined his pill, hundreds of others caught on to what he had managed to do and copied his procedure. The host announced that Kevin had been declared the winner, which drew the ire of, among others, Mason Zimmerman, who had been the first one to successfully refine the pill. As arguments broke out, the old man seated beside the commissioner stood up and demanded an immediate end to the arguments. Immediately, Kevin was able to recognize that this man had reached level 7. How could this be? With the powerful effect of the golden pill and the numerous secret techniques that the Night King had given to Kevin, he had been able to ascend to his current status extraordinarily quickly. However, he was nowhere near this man's power base.
The Herbalist Society's fairness is unquestionable. Those who are not convinced can get out of here immediately,
the old man in blue said in a commanding manner. How could anyone dare to refute him? However, there would always be some hot-headed young kid who would step up and cause trouble. Mason Zimmerman's chest heaved up and down violently. After taking a few deep breaths, he braced himself and stood up. Ignoring the old man's demands, he complained. I don't want to cause trouble, but it seems that things have become a little unclear. Everyone saw that Kevin was about to fail. The furnace was about to explode. How did he succeed all of a sudden? What exactly happened in the white fog? Maybe he secretly changed the herbs to make it work. I hope the Herbalist Society can investigate this matter thoroughly.
Are you questioning the fairness of the Herbalist Society?
The old man narrowed his eyes and looked at Mason Zimmerman intensely. With just one look, Mason Zimmerman felt his body turning cold from head to toe. He moved his mouth a few times and the words were on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't utter a single word. In the end, he still couldn't say anything out loud. He couldn't even move at all.
The decisions made by the Herbalist Society are not to be questioned by anyone. Don't think that I won't dare to punish you accordingly just because you're the grandson of Lawrence Zimmerman. If you say another word, don't blame me for what happens to you next.
The old man in blue reprimanded him coldly. I don't want to question the Herbalist Society. I just want a fair result and a thorough explanation. I want justice. Mason forcefully replied, trying his best not to let his voice tremble. Since you want justice, I will give you justice, the commissioner said. Very quickly, he walked to the edge of the platform and looked down at everyone. Kevin's eyes were fixed on him. For some reason, although his appearance could give some people a calm feeling, deep inside his heart, the man's presence and his gaze instilled in Kevin a fear that came from the depths of his soul. Even the commissioner of the competition had an extraordinary power base. Kevin couldn't help but wonder what kind of power the leader of the Herbalist Society had. Mason Zimmerman, do you think it's unfair to not put you in the first place? The commissioner asked plainly. It's not like that, sir. I just wanted to point out that this competition is an extremely significant event for the Herbalist Society. There shouldn't be anything that goes against the rules, otherwise the Herbalist Society won't be able to maintain their lofty reputation, which has always been so well deserved. Mason's right hand, which had been placed behind his back, was tightly pinching his skin and muscles. He used the pain to try to steady himself. He pretended to be calm and composed, but it was obvious that he was anything but. He added, Kevin's pill furnace was about to explode. I really don't believe that under such circumstances a person who can't even control the temperature of his furnace can then miraculously manage to refine the pill. When the people present heard his argument, they unconsciously nodded their heads. I feel that things aren't as simple as they appear, Mason added. Of course he's right. Mason is one of the best among the younger generation. First place should definitely be his, someone whispered. That kid definitely did something shady to be able to refine the pill when his furnace was in such a condition. How can someone like that win first place? Someone else said in response. Kevin only shrugged his shoulders slightly when he heard the insults directed at him from all around him. All these years he had grown quite accustomed to being insulted and doubted, so this was really nothing new. It was just that this was the first time he was facing this kind of ridicule in front of so many people. A complacent smile appeared on Mason Zimmerman's face. This was the situation he wanted all along. As long as he could get public opinion on his side, he knew that the higher-ups would have no choice but to follow suit and declare him the winner.
"Do you think that this matter is really so watertight?"
The commissioner said as he snapped his fingers slightly. An invisible force seemingly suppressed all the noise around him, and he stared at Mason calmly.
What do you mean?"
Mason stammered. He suddenly had a bad feeling deep in his gut. Especially when he saw Kevin sitting steadily nearby, he suddenly could not figure out what was going on there. For some reason, he felt as though he had been framed, and he could not get off the stage now. Perhaps Mason Zimmerman would never think that Kevin had any strengths, or certainly not nearly as many strengths as he possessed himself. But the one thing he had to admit was that this kid had thick skin. It was so thick, in fact, that no one seemed to be able to break through it no matter how hard they tried.
"You think you did it all perfectly, don't you?"
The commissioner asked Mason as he touched his chin and said with interest.
"But do you even realize that it's possible that there is someone better than you? As long as anyone has ever done anything in this world, it is impossible to do it flawlessly."
"What do you mean?" Mason stammered again, as he became more and more nervous. He felt that something he had done had been caught by the commissioner, but he didn't know what it was.
"Everyone, please pay close attention. I have something to show everyone,"
the commissioner announced as he slowly took out his right hand and tossed something. Under the pale white light, a small broken piece of something appeared before everyone's eyes. The people sitting in the audience may still have been in a state of confusion, but the herbalists who participated in the competition had been experts for many years. One look, and they could tell the reason why this piece was black was entirely due to the temperature in the furnace. But they did not understand why the commissioner had presented such a thing right now.
"What is this thing? Why are you treating us like 3-year-old children?"
Mason demanded. His facial expression was extremely ugly. He stared at the broken piece in front of him and his eyes were filled with complicated emotions.
"Shouldn't you know this thing better than me?" the commissioner asked.
As he spoke, the smile on his face did not change at all.
"What do you mean?"
Mason asked as his expression suddenly changed.
"I hope you're not trying to slander me. How dare you?"
"How dare you?"
The two old men, one in blue and one in white, spoke at the same time. In the blink of an eye, they had arrived in front of Mason, staring at him fiercely from both sides. How could someone like Mason Zimmerman dare to offend the commissioner?
"No need to attack him,"
the commissioner said calmly, as he waved his hand casually as if he didn't take Mason's offense to heart at all.
"Let me ask you, do you still want to hide the truth at this point? Wouldn't that just make you a disgrace to your family at this point? What would your grandfather think?"
the commissioner asked. Mason didn't say anything, and his right hand was still positioned behind his back and slightly hooked his index finger. The commissioner continued.
"Actually, there are some things that I didn't want to point out. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to maintain your reputation for your sake and for the sake of the Zimmerman family. But you don't know what's good for you. You are shameless. You have become even more aggressive and you want to push Kevin to the ground. Do you really think that everyone in the Herbalist Society is blind?"
His tone suddenly became serious. A powerful pressure accompanied by a vast amount of spiritual energy rushed in all directions. Everyone's facial expression changed in an instant. It was as if there was a sharp sword hanging above all of their heads. It seemed like it could fall down on them at any moment. Even the sky seemed as if it had changed drastically. Originally, the sun was shining brightly overhead and the sky was perfectly clear. But in what seemed like just a few seconds, the sky was now covered in dark clouds, And from time to time there was rolling thunder and bolts of lightning. It was as if the heavens were angry. "You can affect the weather just like that?" Kevin thought to himself, shocked in his heart. He looked at the changes all around him in disbelief. In the end, his eyes were completely fixed on the commissioner. I still don't understand what you mean," Mason stammered. He was still refusing to admit it, even though he knew very well that the commissioner had long ago discovered his little scheme. "Is that so?" The commissioner frowned and subconsciously looked at Kevin, who was standing next to Mason. Maybe it was because of the audience that was assembled there, but he apparently decided to slowly disperse the pressure. At that moment, a man sounded as if he was choking and ran out in front of him. He kneeled on the ground with a puff. He kowtowed to the commissioner with all his strength. "Sir, please calm down. It's all my fault. That fragment belongs to Mr. Zimmerman, but it was accidentally shattered by me," the man said in a desperate tone. "Oh, is that so?" The commissioner snorted. "I think a lot of people are currently in a state of confusion, so let me explain it to everyone. I found this fragment at the site of the crack in Kevin's pill furnace, but the pill furnace is made of pure copper. Why is there a piece of broken jade? That's why I'm asking young Mr. Zimmerman for an explanation," he said forcefully. As commissioner of the competition and one of the higher-ups in the Herbalist Society, if he didn't have some skill, how could he have ever ascended to the position he was in now? From the beginning, everyone's actions were directly in his line of sight. Mason Zimmerman's despicable actions were now laid out clearly for all to see. At first, the commissioner was still considering whether Kevin hadn't noticed it, but at this point the matter would need to be settled. He could have addressed it in a less public way. However, Mason had to choose to be aggressive and even tried to incite the surrounding people to pressure the Herbalist Society into overturning their decision and naming him the winner of the competition. If it was such a big organization, how can it be influenced by one kid? If he got what he wanted, the commissioner and the other higher-ups would not be able to do anything in the future. The commissioner's words immediately caused a commotion all around him. The situation had suddenly become very clear to everyone. "Damn, it can't be," someone said. "How could Mason Zimmerman do such a despicable thing? Did he really try to sabotage him?" another person asked. "He would have finished first anyway. There's no need for him to frame others," someone else said. Although the surrounding people were pointing and whispering at Mason, none of them dared to raise their voices too loudly. After all, they were all still afraid of making an enemy out of Mason Zimmerman. After the judges declared Kevin the winner of the preliminary round of the competition, Mason Zimmerman objected. The commissioner stepped forward to toss a small jade fragment in front of Mason and to announce to everyone that it had been discovered at the bottom of Kevin's furnace, right where the crack had appeared. He explained that this had caused the intense smoke that poured out of Kevin's furnace. Everyone was shocked at the apparent revelation that Mason had tried to sabotage Kevin. Only now did Kevin understand why there was so much danger of the cauldron exploding when he was refining the pill. It turned out that someone was trying to sabotage him. All of a sudden, his positive impression of Mason Zimmerman instantly vanished. In its place, a deep feeling of resentment rose in him. "Sir, please let me explain," Mason said, intent on fighting to his last breath. "What do you want to say?" the commissioner asked as he slightly raised his chin. The man who had stepped forward interjected, saying, "Sir, please. This matter is all my fault. I broke a pendant that belonged to young Mr. Zimmerman. I wanted to find a shop to repair it before he asked me for it back, but I didn't expect it to be so rare and valuable that no shop in the city could even repair it. So I wanted to take advantage of the fact that there were so many people competing here today and throw the broken fragment away without anyone noticing. If he asked about it later, I was just going to say that it was stolen. But I didn't think that, when I released it, the force of the furnace would be so great that the fragment would fly right into it." As the man spoke, he was on the verge of tears, like a child who had done something wrong and was now desperately confessing after holding it inside for so long. Only after the man told the commissioner everything did everyone else come to a realization.
Like I said, how could Mason Zimmerman do something like that? Clearly it was a misunderstanding, someone said. You didn't believe me when I said that he was innocent, someone else responded.
Mason Zimmerman couldn't help feeling proud of himself. Before he attacked, he had already arranged everything clearly. Not to mention that Kevin had successfully refined the pill, but even if Kevin was killed by the explosion, it wouldn't have affected him in the least. Kevin narrowed his eyes and looked at the man and then at Mason. The anger in his heart became stronger and stronger. As the saying goes, the one who is involved in a matter too closely is often the most ignorant one. But in this case, only the person who is most directly involved in this matter would understand. Anyone in Kevin's position who wasn't blind would be able to tell that this person from the Zimmerman family was talking absolute nonsense.
So that's how it is. Then I really don't know what's going on, the commissioner said.
He didn't continue to dwell on this matter because he knew very well that if someone came out to take the blame for Mason Zimmerman, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him anymore.
Today's matter ends here. Those who have passed the preliminary round will be contacted later. I hope you can continue to work hard until then, he added.
After the commissioner finished explaining the situation, he turned around and walked back into the depths of the Herbalist Society's compound. Kevin bit his lip hard and stared at Mason with a cold and angry expression on his face. However, Mason only subtly gave him the middle finger and revealed a victorious smile. Then he left under the lead of the Herbalist Society's people. At that moment, the old man in white walked up to Kevin and said,
"The commissioner would like to see you."
"He wants to see me?" Kevin pointed at his chest in confusion. He instantly realized that things were not as simple as they appeared. He could only imagine how bad his reputation within the Herbalist Society was. It could even be said that he was notorious. But at that time, Kevin was in Chicago. Now it was different. If he dared to step out of line on someone else's territory, he wouldn't have the confidence to do anything. "May I ask what he wants to see me about?" Kevin pulled his head up and asked weakly.
"He has his own considerations when it comes to you. You will know when you go to speak with him,"
the old man in white said expressionlessly.
"You don't have to ask me about anything else. I don't know anything else."
"I can't refuse?" Kevin asked. He really didn't want to go. The old man in white didn't say anything else. He just blinked his eyes and stared at Kevin. This young man's performance today had gone beyond his wildest expectations. Not only was his skill in herbalism superb, but his courage was also quite admirable. Moreover, he had an extraordinary and calm demeanor. All of this was surprising because of his age. Then lead the way," Kevin said as he awkwardly licked his lips. Meanwhile, at Chicago's Healing Arts School, Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford were watching the competition on a computer. The Herbalist Society's competition had been broadcast live. Wayne Ford slowly let go of the edge of the desk and took a deep breath. He leaned against the sofa and was clearly thinking deeply about something. Although Kevin won first place in the preliminary round, Harley Shepard, who was sitting next to Wayne Ford, thought it was a different situation. In a situation with hundreds of thousands of people in the audience, not many people thought Kevin would even have a chance to win. But Harley couldn't help but wonder if Kevin was making too many enemies in Washington.
"This kid's situation is even worse than we imagined,"
Harley Shepard said faintly.
"After all, he's an outsider. It's reasonable that no one would think highly of him without any background information about him."
Wayne Ford narrowed his eyes and revealed a nondescript expression. As soon as he finished speaking, the office fell into silence. After a long pause, Harley Shepard slowly opened his mouth and said,
"Why don't you let those old guys know and ask them to take care of him?"
"Let them know? It would be better to think of Jake Morris protecting that kid," Wayne Ford murmured.
Obviously, they were very clear about Kevin's every move in Washington. Harley Shepard twitched his mouth but didn't continue. After thinking for a long time, Wayne Ford let out a long sigh.
"Why don't I just work harder? It will also make this kid's situation a little better."
In a room in one of the buildings in Herbalist City, the competition's commissioner was sitting by the window. He held a glass of dark red wine in his hand and looked at the bustling crowd outside below him. He was essentially at the highest position on the tallest mountain peak of the Herbalist Society. Looking at everything from this angle, it was as if all living things were under his feet. It gave the illusion that everything in the world was under his control. Not long after the commissioner had poured the glass of wine, Kevin walked in alone from the door at the other side of the room. When he saw the furnishings in the room, his eyes lit up. The coffee table, the sofa, the bottles of wine, and all the decorative items were placed in perfect positions. Kevin was sure that the layout of this place had definitely been overseen by an incredible designer.
"I thought you would be wandering around outside for a while by now,"
the commissioner said without turning his head. "You are a great and powerful man. I am just a marginal figure in this world. I admit that I was very nervous when I learned that you wanted to see me. I am afraid that I will offend you if I do something wrong," Kevin said. He didn't care whether the commissioner was a friend or an enemy. Either way, it wouldn't hurt to flatter him. Kevin didn't believe that the commissioner would still be willing to make a move on him if he was able to get in his good graces.
"If that's what you think, why are you still hesitating at the door for so long?"
the commissioner said, still not looking up at him. Kevin looked over his shoulder and chuckled. The old man in white had only called him over a few minutes ago, and when he reached the doorway, the old man didn't even say anything before he turned around and left. Kevin didn't know the nature of the matter the commissioner wanted to discuss, but he knew one thing. It would be as easy as pinching an ant for the commissioner to kill him right here and now without a trace. "I'm just feeling a bit uneasy. You look down on thousands of people. Even though I come from Chicago hundreds of miles away, you are still well known by everyone. You don't know, I just glanced at you from afar. To be able to speak to someone like you, to be in your presence, it can be overwhelming." As Kevin expected, the commissioner couldn't take it anymore. He had to turn around and look at him. He asked,
"Okay, that's enough flattery. You've said so much. I only want to ask you one question. Do you know my name?"
He was afraid that the atmosphere would become awkward. Kevin suddenly stopped talking. He did not know what to say for a long time.
"It seems that what you said before was nonsense,"
the commissioner said as he stretched his legs and slowly stood up from the sofa. No. It's just that someone like me looking up at someone in your position. It's normal that I would only refer to you by your titles," Kevin tried to explain, racking his brain.
"All right, but reputation is an external matter. Now let me tell you something serious,"
the commissioner said. His tone was obviously much softer than before. Obviously, a part of him had accepted Kevin's flattery. "Go ahead." Kevin acted like a capable subordinate and said, "I'll listen to whatever you say." The commissioner glanced at him and paused for a moment. He did not know why this interaction was so different from what he had heard about Kevin.
"Do you know how much danger you are in today?"
he asked as he returned to the sofa and sat down. He gave Kevin a look and signaled for him to sit across from him. Kevin nodded seriously and said, "Mason Zimmerman did something behind my back to try to sabotage me."
"Then do you know why I let him play tricks when I know that he is guilty?"
the commissioner asked again with interest. "Maybe you have your reasons. It is normal for people in positions like yours to have reasons for doing things that they don't express openly." Kevin saw the opportunity and flattered him even more.
"There's no need to say these fake things. Let me be frank with you. I don't want to casually provoke the power behind Mason Zimmerman. Besides, your relationship with the Herbalist Society isn't very good to begin with. The reason why I'm helping you today is because of Jake Morris," the commissioner said straightforwardly.
Kevin frowned when he heard that. He really couldn't figure out what kind of power Mason Zimmerman had. How could he make such a high-ranking figure in the Herbalist Society be so cautious? "What is your relationship with Jake Morris?" Kevin asked out of curiosity.
"I don't think I need to explain to you. Nowadays, who doesn't have many close relationships?"
he replied, chuckling lightly at Kevin's question. Kevin couldn't laugh, knowing that this man had some mysterious connection to Jake, and Kevin wasn't yet sure what that would mean for him. After the competitors began to disperse, Kevin was beckoning to the chambers of the commissioner, who was drinking a glass of red wine alone on the sofa while overlooking the crowded streets below. The commissioner told Kevin he did not want to provoke the powerful people behind Mason Zimmerman, even though it was clear to him that he was guilty of trying to sabotage Kevin. The commissioner then revealed that he was looking out for Kevin for the sake of Jake Morris, which confused Kevin. However, the commissioner clearly did not want to explain the nature of his relationship with Jake Morris, no matter how firmly Kevin pushed. "You called me here today. I'm sure that it was for a reason other than to not tell me these things, right?"
"Since you are so straightforward, I will not hide it from you."
The commissioner took a sip of red wine and said,
"Frankly speaking, I am very curious about the method you used in the White Fog. Can you tell me a thing or two about that?"
Kevin suddenly realized why the commissioner had called him here. However, this was normal. There was no love or hatred in this world for no reason. Kevin and the commissioner had met by chance, and it could even be said that there was a conflict of interest between them. So why did he treat him so well? Was there a free lunch in this world after all? Kevin was doubtful. "Can I choose to refuse to answer?" Kevin asked as his fist, which was resting on his knee, unconsciously clenched together. He really did not expect that the white fog would be so dense that even he, who was in the midst of it, would find it so difficult to see the pill furnace. He could only rely on the high temperature to determine where a crack had appeared inside the furnace. Kevin thought that no one would know what he was doing under the cover of the fog, but the commissioner actually knew exactly what he was doing.
"You know that when the Herbalist Society first started refining pills, we discovered that even when a crack appears in the pill furnace and is about to explode, it's still possible to successfully refine the pill. Such a technique is known as the miracle hand. If this happens within the Herbalist Society, it's seen as a great thing. The overall strength of the Herbalist Society definitely increases significantly when one of its members has this capability. However, you, Kevin, are not a member of the Herbalist Society. You can even be considered to have a strained relationship with us. So with what you demonstrated today in front of hundreds of thousands of eyes, there are now countless people among us who want to get rid of you. So I will give you a chance today. If you explain the method honestly, the matter between you and the Herbalist Society will be written off completely. The slate will be wiped clean. And from now on, you will be the most honorable guest of the Herbalist Society. You can also join us if you so choose. It just so happens that you are also an herbalist and a talented one at that. According to my understanding, you already possess quite a significant number of pill formulas. Being a high-level herbalist is already more than enough."
The commissioner said faintly, as if he was narrating a matter that came naturally. Looking at the smile on his face, Kevin finally understood why this dignified man would take the risk of offending the Zimmerman family for the sake of this nameless kid. Although Kevin didn't know what kind of strength Mason Zimmerman possessed, he knew based on his last name alone that he was a formidable person here in Washington. The clock hanging on the wall was ticking, and time kept passing by. Kevin lowered his head and thought of various possibilities in his mind. The commissioner was not in a hurry. He even asked someone to go get another bottle of wine. After a long pause, the commissioner asked with a smile,
"Have you thought about it?"
"Do I have the right to refuse?" Kevin asked, smiling bitterly. The words he spoke sounded like a struggle.
"Of course, everyone has the right to choose. I can't interfere with your decision, but I also believe that you are a smart person. You won't choose to do something stupid,"
the commissioner said as he swirled the red wine in his hand. Kevin's mood sank a little when he heard this. The man's words were very clear. If Kevin did not accept his terms, there was a good chance Kevin would not leave this building alive. Kevin did not doubt for a second that the commissioner had the ability to eliminate him. If he was lucky, he would leave here safely today, but he would also be blacklisted by the Herbalist Society and would be hunted down by this huge organization. "Can I choose to refuse?" Kevin asked again, slowly raising his head. He clenched his fist so tightly that his nails almost dug into his flesh.
Of course you can, but have you thought about the consequences of that?
The commissioner said as he knocked on the table with his right hand a few times. The atmosphere in the room fell straight to the freezing point. I have thought it through. I am indeed grateful to you, but I do not like to be restrained. If I join the Herbalist Society, I'm afraid I would be... Besides, my wife, friends, and other family members are all ordinary people. They won't be able to adapt to this life, Kevin replied. The commissioner snorted. Kevin was clearly rejecting him. At the same time, he was warning him not to have any ideas about going after his friends and family. He was using this to subtly threaten and coerce him.
Have you truly thought it through?
The commissioner asked as the smile on his face gradually disappeared.
Once you step out of this room, you cannot change your mind.
I've made up my mind, Commissioner. Thank you again for seeing me, Kevin said as he took a deep breath and finally stood up. Kevin did not choose to stay any longer than he had to. He quickly left the room. When he left, he realized that he was soaked in sweat. Looking down at the cigar smoke rising from the table in front of him, the commissioner let a mocking smile spread across his face. Then he took out his phone and sent a message. A moment later, the old man in blue walked in and respectfully lowered his head slightly.
There's no need.
The commissioner coldly spat 3 words.
Then I will pass down the instructions from before,
the old man said with a surprised expression on his face.
I have reached for a bright moon to shine on my heart, but the bright moon shines on the ditches instead.
The commissioner got up and went to the window and raised his hand toward the sun. It was as if he could control the sun with his own will.
I wanted to give him a way out, but unfortunately I can't use him.
The old man in blue didn't say anything as he stood motionless behind him. He then sighed and typed a message on his phone before sending it out. After leaving the building, the sunlight enveloped Kevin, but it did not bring him any warmth. The coldness in the depths of his heart and the mental pressure he was facing made it difficult for him to even walk. The bustling streets here seemed too unfriendly now. Kevin felt as though he was about to lose his way in this flood. He didn't know what he should do next. When he arrived back at the arena where the competition was, Carson Murphy was nowhere to be found. Kevin had no choice but to leave alone. The feeling he had when he left was completely different from that when he had arrived. The fame of the Herbalist Society not only affected Washington, D.C., but also the entire country. Therefore, the name of the champion of the preliminary round, Kevin Williams, was now known by many ordinary people. Another young genius had appeared on the scene. Among those who were watching the show, there were many who were happy with this development, but also some who were not. Meanwhile, in Chicago at the Williams Company headquarters, Lily had Sandra Wilson gather all of the company's employees for an emergency meeting. I believe that today's meeting made everyone a bit uneasy, so I want to tell everyone a piece of good news here. Our CEO, Kevin Williams, participated in the herbalism competition held by the Herbalist Society in Washington, D.C. today. He won first place in the preliminary round. To celebrate, everyone will be rewarded with a month's paid vacation and a $10,000 bonus. Lily, who was wearing a business suit, announced her decision with a wide smile on her face.
What the hell? Is this for real? Someone said.
A $10,000 bonus? This is incredible, another person said. All of the employees instantly exploded into several overlapping conversations, beaming with joy as they discussed this development with each other. The same thing happened not only at the Williams Company, but also at the Willow Leaf Corporation and the Orion Group. Tyler Dawn, Gilbert Rhodes, and many others were all very happy. They generously gave their employees a significant bonus. At the headquarters of the Radiants, Spencer was overjoyed. But compared to them, the mood of the Williams family in New York City could be said to be lower than ever. Now that Kevin had reached such lofty heights without them, or even despite them, how could they bring themselves to accept it?
Hey, did you guys hear that Kevin won the Herbalist Society competition?
someone said.
It's over for us. Just look at how we treated Kevin before. It's all because Thomas forced him out. Otherwise, he would be able to share in his glory with him today,
someone else answered. All of the members of the Williams family were discussing the news in low voices. However, no one dared to mention it to Thomas Williams. Everyone had their guard up. Everyone knew that if he heard that someone was discussing this matter, they would definitely be punished severely. Thomas Williams' brows were tightly knitted together in the study. His wife Laura and his son Ethan were sitting side by side across from him. The three of them did not speak, but the silence here was louder than words.
I really didn't expect that piece of trash Kevin would be able to pull this off,
Ethan muttered in a low voice, unwilling to give up.
There are apparently far too many things that you didn't expect, Thomas Williams roared angrily. If you had been more hardworking, maybe you would have been able to keep up with your cousin.
Facing his father's scolding, Ethan did not dare to utter a single word. He could only silently accept it. How can we blame Ethan for this? I think you are full of anger and can't find a place to vent it, right? The whole matter of Kevin was planned and executed by you and me, Laura said, coming to her son's defense. She was not in a good mood, but she was intent on standing up for her son.
And who did we do it for? In the end, it was all for him, wasn't it?
Thomas Williams roared angrily as he pointed at Ethan.
Look at him. Other than using his power to bully people beneath him and show off, what else has he done? All he does is go out drinking and gambling. If it wasn't for you pampering him, I would have disowned this kid long ago.
At the Williams family mansion in New York City, Thomas Williams argued intensely with his wife Laura and their son Ethan. Laura tried to defend their son from his father's wrath, insisting that Kevin was expelled from the family based on the decision of the two of them. But Thomas was unrelenting, saying that they had pushed Kevin out to clear the way for Ethan to ascend, and all he had done was squander the opportunity with his laziness. Laura stood up and said, "What's the point of arguing about this now? If you have the ability, go and try to bring Kevin back. But we all know you've already burned that bridge beyond the point of repair." She angrily threw the nail polish bottle she had been holding onto the ground. She added, "Son, let's go. If we don't sit here and take the nonsense spewed by this horrible father of yours, let's see where else he can vent his anger." Laura pulled Ethan out of the room. Thomas was so angry that he pushed the coffee table in front of him to the ground with both hands. The expensive crystal tray on top of it shattered into pieces. No one would have thought that when he heard the news, his heart would be filled with so much regret. Now that Thomas thought about it, it didn't seem that Ethan would have ever been suitable enough to take over the Williams family. Pushing Kevin out was a bad decision from the start. Even if he handed over the family business to Ethan, it wouldn't have taken long for him to lose everything. If Kevin was still in the fold, the family's wealth and status would definitely be increasing day by day. Now, not only had they missed this opportunity, but they had also put themselves on the receiving end of Kevin's hatred. How could the Williams family ever recover in the future? Thomas had to admit at last that he was why the family was on the edge of ruin. Meanwhile, in the mansion of the Murphy family in Washington, D.C., Donald Murphy and Herman Thompson were sitting together in the study. One of them had a worried expression on his face, while the other had a smile on his face. Otherwise, there was no difference in the demeanor of the two of them. "Old friend, you really have a sharp eye. You actually found a real hidden gem, didn't you?" Donald took a deep breath, put down the tablet in his hands, and said with a sigh, "You still have a chance, you know. It's not too late to take a gamble on him yourself," Herman said happily. "And don't forget that there is still the Morris family behind him." "Do you think the Morris family is reliable?" Donald tilted his head and said, "Jake Morris doesn't represent the attitude of the entire Morris family, not by a long shot. Besides, haven't you noticed?
Today, Kevin seemed to have indirectly provoked Lawrence Zimmerman again. Not to mention the Herbalist Society. Currently, Kevin is still surrounded by danger. I am afraid that the preliminary round alone isn't enough for him to be untouchable." What he said was reasonable and logical. Herman did not choose to refute. "Oh, right. Isn't Kevin coming back here today? It has been a while, and even Carson hasn't come back yet," Herman said, not wanting to dwell on the issue any longer. "Why do people of our generation need to care so much? Why do you and I interfere so much?" Donald said faintly. Donald's words were indeed reasonable. No matter how powerful the older generation was, it's impossible for them to influence the matters of the next generation as much as they would like to. Everyone's fate was undecided, but they were born into a family like the Murphy family. Donald was fully aware of how much of an advantage that put him and every one of his descendants. "Oh, I just remembered something. Since Kevin's skill in herbalism is so strong, why don't we let him take a look at our friend Mr. Eubanks? If he can figure out a cure," Donald said. Herman interrupted him with some difficulty. "It's a good idea, but I'm afraid Kevin won't agree." "It depends. I'll make the call now." Donald took out his phone as he spoke. "We don't have many years left, after all." Herman initially wanted to argue the point. After all, Kevin's relationship with the Eubanks family was, needless to say, not good. However, when he saw Donald taking out his phone, he couldn't bear to refuse. These men had been friends for more than half of their lives. The deep relationship between them couldn't be doubted. Although the preliminary round of the herbalism competition had ended, there were still 2 days left until the next round. The Herbalist Society had prepared a special area for the participants in between stages of the competition. It had to be said that the Herbalist Society had an incredible amount of resources at its disposal. The hundreds of people who had passed the preliminary round were living in a newly built village of mansions as they waited for the next round to begin. Although Kevin received the invitation to the competitors' village from the relevant people, he did not enter right away. Instead, he just sat down on the side of the street in Herbalist City. Looking at the people coming and going, he was at a loss as to what to do next. Although he was quite famous now, he had also taught a lot of people a lesson they didn't necessarily want to learn. But so what? The Herbalist Society could do whatever it wanted to him, especially after what he had just said to the competition's commissioner. In the past, Kevin thought that he had few peers in this world. But today, 2 old men, not to mention the commissioner, could have easily crushed him between their fingers like a bug. With mixed feelings in his heart, Kevin raised his head and stared at the white clouds in the sky overhead. He kept thinking about why the universe was so unfair. What did he do wrong? What did he do to cause everyone to hate him so much? At this moment, his phone suddenly rang and the screen displayed Herman Thompson's name. Kevin hesitated for a moment before he answered the phone. "Mr. Thompson." "What's wrong with you? Why do you sound like you want to die?" Herman immediately replied. "It's nothing. I'm just tired from the competition. I'll be fine after resting for a while." Kevin casually made up an excuse and then asked back, "Is there anything that you want from me?" "Well, I have a bit of a presumptuous request. I hope you can agree to it." Herman licked his dry lips and said, "Okay. Why don't you tell me about it first?" Kevin was not a hot-headed person, so he readily agreed. Still, he needed to be careful, especially now. "Do you remember Kurt Eubanks' grandfather, George?" Herman asked. He did not wait for Kevin's answer before he said, "I don't know exactly what happened to that old man. He developed a strange disease about 5 years ago. He's no different from a normal person during the day, but he becomes crazy at night." Kevin frowned when he heard that. It was really strange to hear. "But he and I have been friends for a long time. In recent years, his family has secretly found countless doctors to try and treat him. However, his situation hasn't gotten any better."
Herman sighed with some sadness, feeling sorry for George Eubanks. Mr. Thompson, there's something that I need to make clear in advance. It is true that I know how to refine medicinal pills, but that's all. I know nothing about other medical matters. It might be a piece of cake for me to refine a pill for someone, but that doesn't mean that I can cure someone of a mysterious disease. Kevin smiled bitterly and answered. It wasn't that he didn't want to help people. Besides, if he succeeded, wouldn't he and the Eubanks family become allies? After all, he needed all the friends he could get at this point, given the situation with the Herbalist Society. Herman was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the phone. I understand what you're saying, but Kevin, you should still go and take a look. What if you can refine a pill to cure him? He asked. All right, Kevin said after a long pause. He was a little embarrassed to reject Herman's request. After all, this old man had helped him a lot. He owed a lot of favors to Herman and the Thompson family. When are you going to be able to see him? Just let me know and I'll set it up, Herman said. Herman added, There are still 3 days left before the next round. You should get some rest tonight. How about we go to see George tomorrow? Don't worry about me, Mr. Thompson. I'm fine. Let's go see him right away and just see what the situation is. Can you have someone come to Herbalist City and pick me up? Kevin asked. He didn't want to delay and would rather put an end to this situation as soon as possible. All right. My people will be there soon, Herman said before he hung up the phone. Kevin took a deep breath and leaned back. He squinted his eyes and looked out at the city. Soon, a driver that Herman had arranged pulled up in front of Kevin to pick him up. The Eubanks family's mansion was located on the east side of Washington. It would take about 45 minutes to get there. Along the way, Herman and Kevin talked about a lot of things, mostly revolving around what they should do in Washington in the future. Kevin thought that since Herman was an experienced man, his opinion on what to do would definitely be better informed than Kevin's. There wouldn't be any harm in listening to what he had to say. Kid, I know you aren't an ordinary person. Washington is a place full of gold. But humans and ghosts are indistinguishable here. What you need to do is not only look out for yourself, but constantly be aware of who is making moves around you. Even if you don't want to believe it, the power you have in Chicago is virtually useless in Washington, Herman said. He paused for a moment before adding, You don't have enough connections, not yet at least. You have to start from scratch here and build something that belongs solely to you. Herman leaned back in his seat, slowly analyzing the situation in front of him. Kevin frowned slightly. Herman continued, To put it bluntly, you need to nurture your own confidence. It won't be easy and you'll need to take it one step at a time. It will be impossible for you to do everything by yourself. You need to take care of people with power in different areas. When you charge at the enemy lines, these people will help you consolidate the rear. Kevin had come to Herman knowing that he was older and thus wiser. But now Kevin had to give Herman's words long and careful thought if he were to put such a plan into action.